So, you're here for the weird stuff, the tech stories that didn't make it into the textbooks, the scandals, the conspiracies, the billion-dollar mistakes, and the rabbit holes that go deeper than you'd expect. The kind of stuff you stumble across at 2 in the morning and can't stop reading about. Over the next few hours, we're going to cover a lot of ground. And I mean a lot. This isn't a quick explainer. This is the kind of video you put on while you're working, or driving, or trying to fall asleep. If you make it through the whole thing, you'll know more strange tech history than most people who actually work in the industry. Here's what we're covering. First, we'll look at regulations and standards that only exist because something went horribly wrong. Every rule has a story behind it, and in tech, that story usually involves an explosion, a scandal, or a privacy violation so bad that governments had to step in. Then we'll talk about company archetypes. The same types of companies keep appearing throughout tech history, like recurring characters in a very expensive drama, the Vaporware kings who announce products that never ship, the pivot masters who completely reinvent themselves and somehow survive, the Acqui-Hired graveyard, full of beloved products that got bought and killed. Once you see these patterns, you'll start recognizing them everywhere. After that, we're going into the iceberg, 8 levels deep. We'll start with the surface level stuff that everyone knows, like planned obsolescence and dark patterns. Then we'll work our way down through the casual deep cuts, the enthusiast territory, the industry insider knowledge, and eventually into the obscure history that most people have never heard of. By level 6, we're in deep rabbit hole territory. Level 7 is unverified but persistent rumors. And level 8 is the abyss, unsolved mysteries and unexplained disappearances. If you're trying to fall asleep, maybe stop at level 5. Then we'll cover the worst product failures from companies that definitely should have known better. Samsung phones catching fire on airplanes. Google killing products that millions of people loved. A streaming service that raised $1.75 billion and lasted 6 months. These are cautionary tales, but they're also genuinely fascinating stories about how things go wrong. After that, the feuds. Tech is full of rivalries that shape the entire industry. Steve Jobs versus Bill Gates. Apple versus Samsung and the patent wars. Intel versus AMD across decades of competition. Some of these feuds ended in lawsuits, some ended in settlements, and one ended with a deathbed visit and a letter that was kept by the bedside until the end. Finally, we'll look at the pivotal moments, the single decisions and announcements that changed everything. IBM choosing Intel. Steve Jobs visiting Xerox PARC, the iPhone announcement, the Bitcoin Whitepaper, moments where the entire trajectory of technology shifted, sometimes in ways that took years to fully understand. So, get comfortable, grab something to drink if you want, adjust your pillows. This is going to take a while. Let's start with something that affects everyone who's ever been online, the regulations that only exist because something went wrong. Then Section 1. Regulations born from disasters. Every rule exists because someone, somewhere, did something that made the rule necessary. That's true in most industries, but in tech, the stories behind the rules are particularly wild. Explosions, massive data breaches, companies secretly installing malware on their own customers' computers, government agencies running encryption companies for decades without anyone knowing. Over the next half hour or so, we're going to look at about 15 regulations and standards that only exist because something went catastrophically wrong. Some of these you've definitely heard of. Others might explain why certain things work the way they do. And a few of them will make you wonder how anyone thought they could get away with it in the first place. Let's start with the big one. GDPR and Cambridge Analytica. If you've clicked through a cookie consent banner in the last few years, you've interacted with GDPR. The General Data Protection Regulation. It's the European privacy law that changed how every major company handles user data. But while GDPR was technically in development since 2012, the scandal that made everyone pay attention happened in March of 2018. That's when a whistleblower named Christopher Wiley revealed that a company called Cambridge Analytica had harvested personal data from 87 million Facebook users without their consent. Here's how it worked. There was a personality quiz app called This Is Your Digital Life. Nothing suspicious about it on the surface. The app paid users $1 or $2 to answer some questions about themselves. Pretty standard stuff. But the app also harvested data from all of your Facebook friends. Everyone who took the quiz unknowingly gave away the data of hundreds of people in their network. Only about 300,000 people actually took the quiz. But through the Friends loophole, Cambridge Analytica collected profiles on 87 million people. The data was used for what they called psychographic micro-targeting in the 2016 presidential election. Basically, building psychological profiles of voters and serving them customized political content. The company was funded by hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer and effectively run by Steve Bannon. When the story broke, Mark Zuckerberg was called to testify before Congress. He sat in a booster seat because the chair was too low for the cameras and said, quote, "This was a big mistake," unquote. Now, here's the timing that made this significant. GDPR officially went into effect on May 25, 2018. The Cambridge Analytica story broke in March. The scandal hit just weeks before the regulation launched. The timing was coincidental, but powerful. It demonstrated exactly why these kinds of regulations were necessary. And here's the irony. If GDPR had been in effect when Cambridge Analytica harvested the data, Facebook could have faced fines of 814 million euros. Instead, Cambridge Analytica went bankrupt before facing any real consequences. The UK only fined them £15,000. The company that did the harvesting collapsed. The platform that enabled it became even more valuable. And now, we all click through cookie banners every time we visit a website. The USB-C mandate. For over a decade, Apple maintained proprietary connectors while the rest of the tech world standardized on USB. First the 30-pin connector from 2003 to 2012, then Lightning from 2012 through 2024. Meanwhile, everyone else moved to micro USB and eventually USB-C. This wasn't just inconvenient for consumers. The European Union estimated that proprietary chargers created 11,000 tons of e-waste annually just in Europe, 250 million euros in unnecessary consumer spending on redundant chargers. The EU started pushing for a common charger standard back in 2009. In 2012, just as the industry was moving toward micro USB, Apple launched Lightning instead. There was a voluntary industry agreement in 2014. It failed. Apple kept making Lightning cables. Apple's argument was that strict regulation mandating just one type of connector would stifle innovation. They also claimed that forcing a switch to USB-C would actually create more e-waste by making all existing Lightning accessories obsolete. In October 2022, the European Parliament voted 602-13 for mandatory USB-C. By December 2024, the mandate took effect. And here's where it gets funny. Apple now actively promotes USB-C as superior technology. The iPhone 15 and 16 marketing materials tout faster transfer speeds, 10 to 40 gigabits per second, compared to Lightning's 480 megabits per second. The company that fought USB-C for years now acts like they invented it. Right to repair and the tractor. Hackers. Modern John Deere tractors contain over 125 computer sensors and proprietary software that prevents farmers from making simple repairs. If a sensor throws an error code, the tractor won't run, and only authorized John Deere dealerships have the software to diagnose it. This isn't a minor inconvenience. Farming is seasonal. When something breaks during harvest, every day of downtime costs money. Farmers estimated they were losing about $3 billion annually just from tractor downtime. The dealer diagnostic software, called Customer Service Advisor, costs over $3,000 per year, and that's assuming you can even get access to it as a regular farmer. For most, you have to call the dealership, schedule an appointment, wait for a technician, and pay whatever they charge. So farmers started finding workarounds. On invite-only forums, people began trading firmware hacks. A lot of the software was apparently sourced from Eastern Europe and Ukraine, where John Deere equipment also gets used, but the legal restrictions are different. At DEFCON 2022, a hacker who goes by SIC codes publicly demonstrated a jailbreak of John Deere tractor displays. The argument from John Deere was that farmers needed these restrictions for safety and emissions compliance. But here's the thing. The right to repair movement wasn't asking for source code access. They just wanted the same diagnostic tools that dealerships already have. In April 2023, Colorado became the first state to pass a right to repair law specifically for farm equipment. In January 2025, the Federal Trade Commission filed a federal lawsuit against John Deere for unfair, deceptive, and anti-competitive practices. The company that built its reputation on helping farmers now has farmers trading pirated firmware on underground forums just to fix their own equipment. COPPA and the YouTube fine. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, known as COPPA, was created in the late 1990s. The concern at the time was aggressive internet marketing targeting children. Websites were collecting names and addresses from kids without any parental knowledge or consent. For years, COPPA existed in the background. Most companies followed the rules, or at least claimed to. Then YouTube got caught saying two different things to two different audiences. To advertisers like Mattel and Hasbro, YouTube was pitching itself as a, quote, today's leader in reaching children age 6 to 11, unquote. They told Hasbro they were the #1 website regularly visited by kids, great for selling ads. But to the Federal Trade Commission, YouTube claimed it wasn't a children's platform. That distinction mattered because COPPA has strict requirements for platforms that target children. In September 2019, YouTube and Google were fined $170 million, the largest COPPA settlement ever at that point. The settlement forced YouTube to create a made-for-kids designation on videos. But this created chaos for content creators who weren't sure how to classify things like gaming videos or animation that appealed to both kids and adults. Getting it wrong in either direction had consequences. And here's a quote that aged poorly. Back in 2011, Mark Zuckerberg said of COPPA restrictions, quote, "That will be a fight we take on at some point," unquote, revealing how big tech viewed children's privacy as a barrier rather than a protection. The Samsung Note 7 fires. In 2016, Samsung was racing to beat Apple to market with a flagship phone. The Galaxy Note 7 was supposed to be the device that proved Samsung could out-innovate the iPhone. They packed a 3,500 milliamp-hour battery into a phone just 7.9 millimeters thick. The Note 7 launched on August 19, 2016. Pre-orders broke records. Reviews were positive. Samsung had a hit. 2 weeks later, on September 2nd, Samsung announced a recall. 35 phones had caught fire. They issued replacement phones. Problem solved, right? On October 5th, a replacement Note 7 caught fire on a Southwest Airlines flight. The replacement batteries were also defective. 6 days later, Samsung permanently ceased all Note 7 production. The entire product line was dead. Here's what the investigation found. Samsung was using batteries from two different suppliers, Samsung SDI and Amperex Technology Limited. The batteries from Samsung SDI had a design flaw that caused short circuits in the upper right corner. The replacement batteries from Amperex had welding burrs that penetrated the insulation. Both suppliers produced defective batteries. The rush to market meant neither batch was properly tested. The Note 7 became the first consumer product banned from all United States flights. If you tried to board a plane with one, you'd be denied boarding. Flight attendants made announcements specifically about the Note 7. Total cost to Samsung was approximately $17 billion, including brand damage. The phone that was supposed to prove Samsung's superiority became a literal safety hazard and a punchline. Section 2, 30, and the 26 words. In the early 1990s, courts were trying to figure out how to apply existing laws to this new thing called the Internet, and they came to completely contradictory conclusions. In 1991, there was a case called Cubby versus CompuServe. Someone posted defamatory content on CompuServe, and the company got sued. The court ruled that CompuServe wasn't liable because they didn't review posts before they went up. They were just a passive conduit. Then, in 1995, there was Stratton Oakmont versus Prodigy. Similar situation. Defamatory content posted on the platform, but Prodigy had content moderators. They actively tried to keep their platform clean. The court ruled that because Prodigy exercised editorial control, they were liable for what users posted. Think about what that meant. The company that did nothing to moderate content was protected. The company that tried to be responsible faced more liability. This created a perverse incentive. If you wanted to avoid getting sued for user content, The safest strategy was to not moderate anything at all. Congress stepped in with Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act in 1996. The key sentence is just 26 words. Quote, "No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider," unquote. Those 26 words made the modern internet possible. Without Section 230, platforms could be sued for every user post. Social media, reviews, comments, forums, all of it would be legally impossible at scale. The law has been controversial ever since. Critics argue it gives platforms too much protection. Supporters argue that without it, the internet as we know it couldn't exist. But it only exists because two courts came to opposite conclusions, and the responsible company got punished for trying to do the right thing. The Sony Rootkit scandal. On Halloween 2005, a security researcher named Mark Rusinovich discovered something disturbing on his computer. Sony BMG had been secretly installing rootkits on customers' computers through their music CDs. A rootkit is a type of software that hides itself from users. It's the same technique that actual malware uses. You put a Sony music CD in your computer, and without asking permission or even notifying you, it installed hidden software. The software did a few things. It hid itself using the same techniques as viruses. It phoned home to Sony with your listening habits. And it was nearly impossible to remove without breaking your CD drive. This wasn't a small distribution. Sony shipped approximately 22 million CDs with the rootkit. It infected an estimated 550,000 networks, including thousands of U.S. military systems. When the story broke, Sony's response made things worse. Thomas Hesse, the president of Sony BMG's global digital business, went on NPR and said, quote, "Most people don't even know what a rootkit is, so why should they care about it?" Unquote. Here's the final irony. The copy protection that Sony went to such extreme lengths to implement could be defeated with a permanent marker. If you drew a line around the outer edge of the disk with a Sharpie, it blocked the data track that contained the DRM code. The CD would play normally without installing anything. The scandal effectively killed DRM on music CDs industry-wide. Sony faced multiple lawsuits, settled with multiple states, and had to recall millions of disks, all because they thought secretly installing malware on their customers' computers was an acceptable way to prevent piracy. Bug bounty programs. Today, major tech companies pay security researchers millions of dollars to find vulnerabilities in their products. Apple's maximum bounty is $1 million. Google paid $6.7 million in 2020 alone, just for bug reports. But the concept of paying hackers to find problems had to start somewhere. On October 10, 1995, Netscape launched the first modern bug bounty program for Navigator 2.0 beta. A technical support engineer named Jarrett Ridlinghafer came up with the idea and coined the term. He'd noticed that many Netscape users were developers who were finding bugs and even publishing their own patches. The initial reward was up to $1,000 plus Netscape merchandise for security vulnerabilities. Adoption was slow. In 2004, Mozilla offered $500 for critical Firefox vulnerabilities. In 2010, Google's Vulnerability Reward Program launched offering $1,337. That's leet in hacker speak. The real turning point was when governments got involved. In 2016, the Pentagon ran Hack the Pentagon, the first U.S. government bug bounty. In the first 13 minutes, hackers had already reported enough vulnerabilities to earn $75,000. Now, it's standard practice. But for the first 15 years of bug bounties, most companies still treated security researchers as threats rather than assets. The Crypto Wars. After World War II, encryption technology was placed on the U.S. munitions list as Category 13, the same category as weapons. Exporting strong encryption was technically illegal. If you were a U.S. company and you wanted to sell software with encryption overseas, you needed government approval. This created the Crypto Wars. The government wanted to control who had access to strong encryption. Privacy advocates and tech companies argued that encryption was essential for commerce and communication. In 1993, the Clinton administration introduced the Clipper chip. The idea was a government-designed microchip with built-in key escrow. Every chip would have an encryption key, and the NSA would hold a copy of that key. If law enforcement needed to decrypt your communications, they could. The tech industry hated it. Privacy advocates hated it. But the real death blow came from a cryptographer named Matt Blaze. In May 1994, he discovered a fundamental flaw in the Clipper chip design that allowed users to bypass the escrow feature entirely. The chip that was supposed to give the government a backdoor had a front door that anyone could walk through. Meanwhile, activists were making a point about how absurd the export restrictions were. Since encryption algorithms are just math, and math can be written down, they started printing RSA encryption source code on T-shirts. This technically made the T-shirt itself an export-restricted munition. You could theoretically be prosecuted for wearing a T-shirt outside the country. The restrictions eventually loosened in the late 90s. But the debate about government access to encryption never went away. It just went underground for a while. Net neutrality. The concept of net neutrality is that internet service providers should treat all traffic equally. They shouldn't be able to slow down certain websites, block competitors, or charge extra for access to specific services. This sounds obvious now, but it only became a regulatory issue because ISPs kept doing exactly those things. In 2005, Madison River Communications blocked Vonage, a voice-over IP service that competed with their phone business. The FCC imposed a $15,000 fine. In 2007, Comcast was caught secretly throttling peer-to-peer traffic using a technique called TCP reset spoofing. They were forging network packets to disrupt BitTorrent connections. Between 2007 and 2009, AT&T forced Apple to block Skype on the iPhone. You couldn't make Skype calls on the cellular network because AT&T didn't want people bypassing their voice minutes. From 2011 to 2013, all 4 major U.S. carriers blocked Google Wallet, which competed with their own joint mobile payment venture. Every time someone said net neutrality regulations were unnecessary because ISPs would never abuse their position, there was already documented evidence that they had. The FCC passed strong net neutrality rules in 2015. The Trump administration FCC repealed them in 2017. State-level laws have tried to fill the gap since then. The back and forth continues. But the reason net neutrality became an issue in the first place was that every hypothetical abuse that critics warned about had already happened. PCI DSS and credit card security. If you've ever worked at a company that handles credit card data, you've dealt with PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. It's a set of requirements for how credit card information must be stored, processed, and transmitted. The standard exists because in the early 2000s, credit card breaches were becoming routine. Companies were storing card numbers in plain text, transmitting them without encryption, keeping them in systems that didn't need them. The major card brands created PCI DSS in 2004. It requires things like encrypting stored card data, not keeping full card numbers longer than necessary, and having actual security controls in place. Here's the thing, though. Being PCI compliant doesn't mean you're secure. Companies that passed their PCI audits still got breached. Target was PCI compliant when hackers stole 40 million card numbers in 2013. Equifax maintained compliance while losing data on 147 million people. Compliance became a checkbox exercise. Companies would meet the minimum requirements for their annual audit and then ignore security the rest of the year. The regulation created an entire industry of compliance auditors and certification vendors. It probably did reduce the worst practices, but it also created a false sense of security for companies that thought compliance equaled protection. Battery safety standards. Before 2016, there weren't specific regulations for lithium-ion batteries in consumer devices. After the Note 7 fires and a series of hoverboard explosions, that changed. Hoverboards were particularly bad. The cheap ones used knockoff battery cells with no quality control. They were catching fire in people's homes, sometimes while charging overnight. Airlines banned them. Amazon pulled them from sale. The Consumer Product Safety Commission worked with UL, the safety certification company, to develop new standards specifically for hoverboard batteries. UL 272 required testing for overcharge, short circuit, temperature extremes, and physical damage. Similar standards were developed for other lithium-ion devices. The regulations that govern how your phone battery is manufactured trace back to boards that caught fire and phones that exploded on airplanes. The Energy Star Program. Energy Star is the little blue label you see on appliances that meet certain efficiency standards. It seems like a straightforward consumer information program. It exists because of the energy crisis of the 1970s. The program launched in 1992 through the EPA. The idea was that giving consumers clear information about energy efficiency would drive market demand for more efficient products. But the program had problems. The standards were voluntary, and the testing was self-reported. In 2010, the Government Accountability Office submitted fake products to see if they could get Energy Star certification. They submitted a gasoline-powered alarm clock. It was approved. They submitted a product called the Feather Duster Space Heater, also approved. The GAO created 15 fake products with bogus energy consumption data. 13 were certified as Energy Star compliant. After that report, the program tightened its verification requirements. Products now have to be tested by accredited labs. But for almost 20 years, the trusted blue label could be obtained by basically anyone who filled out the paperwork. And that covers the regulations. Every one of these rules exists because someone, somewhere, did something that made the rule necessary. Rootkits on music CDs, phones exploding on airplanes, companies harvesting data from 87 million people through a personality quiz. The rules don't always work. Companies find loopholes. Enforcement is inconsistent. But at least now when something goes wrong, there's usually a framework for saying it shouldn't have happened. That brings us to our next section, because while regulations try to constrain company behavior, there are patterns in how tech companies behave that transcend any individual rule. The same types of companies keep appearing throughout tech history. The vaporware kings, the pivot masters, the products that get bought and killed. Once you see these patterns, you start recognizing them everywhere. Section 2. Company Archetypes. A's-Brastor. If you watch the tech industry long enough, you start seeing the same stories play out over and over. Different names, different decades, but the same patterns. There's always a company promising revolutionary technology that never ships. There's always a beloved product that gets acquired and killed. There's always a company that everyone writes off as dead, and then somehow comes back stronger than before. These aren't coincidences. They're archetypes. Recurring characters in the ongoing drama of technology. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to go through about 15 different archetypes. Some of these are cautionary tales, some are success stories, and some are just patterns that keep repeating because the industry never learns. Let's start with the most frustrating archetype of all. The Vaporware Kings. Vaporware is software or hardware that's announced but never actually ships, or ships so late that it might as well have never existed. The term was coined in 1983 when someone used it to describe Microsoft's tendency to announce products before they were ready. The pattern is always the same. A company announces something incredible. People get excited, pre-orders flow in, and then delays, and more delays, and eventually either the product ships as a shadow of what was promised, or it disappears entirely. Let's talk about the current reigning champion. Star Citizen was announced in 2012 through a Kickstarter campaign. The original release date was 2014. As of January 2026, the game is still in alpha. That's over 13 years in development. The project has raised nearly $900 million, making it one of the most expensive pieces of entertainment media ever produced. For context, the budget for Avengers Endgame was $356 million. Star Citizen has raised more than twice that, and the game isn't finished. The scope kept expanding. Every time backers gave more money, the developers promised more features. Wired magazine gave it their Vaporware Award in 2016. In August 2025, creator Chris Roberts said they were aiming for a 2027 or 2028 release. Whether Star Citizen is an incredible vision that needs time to realize, or the greatest vaporware in history, depends entirely on whether it ever actually ships. Then there's Duke Nukem Forever. Announced in 1997, released in 2011, 14 years later. The game appeared on Wired's Vaporware list for a record 12 consecutive years. When it finally came out, reviews were brutal. Sometimes the anticipation is better than the reality. Even Apple isn't immune. In 2017, they announced AirPower, a wireless charging mat that would charge your iPhone, Apple Watch, and AirPods simultaneously. Simple concept, elegant design. They showed it on stage and put it on their website. In 2019, they quietly canceled it. The technical challenges of charging multiple devices with overlapping coils proved too difficult. It's rare for Apple to announce something and then admit they can't build it. And then there's the vaporware that nobody officially announced, but everyone keeps waiting for. Anyway, Half-Life 3 was never formally confirmed, but the wait became such a cultural phenomenon that the phrase Half-Life 3 confirmed became its own meme. Valve has never explained why Episode 3 was abandoned. They just stopped talking about it. The Vaporware Kings teach us that announcement is not the same as delivery, and that sometimes the most hyped products are the ones that never arrive. The Pivot Masters. Some companies fail at their original idea, but find success by completely reinventing themselves. These are the Pivot Masters, companies that would be forgotten footnotes if they hadn't transformed into something entirely different. Nokia started as a paper mill in 1865. That's the same year the American Civil War ended. For their first 100 years, they made paper, rubber products, and eventually rubber boots. In 1967, they merged their electronics, cable, and rubber divisions. By the 1990s, Nokia was the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer. At their peak in 2000, Nokia was 4% of Finland's entire GDP. The Nokia 1100 and 1110 became two of the best-selling phones in history, with over 250 million units each. A paper mill became a mobile phone giant. That's a pivot. Nintendo has an even stranger history. Founded in 1889, the same year the Eiffel Tower was built. Their original product was Hanafuda playing cards. For their first 70 years, they made cards. Then they tried a bunch of things that didn't work. Taxi services, love hotels, instant rice. None of it stuck. In 1977, they entered the video game market. The rest is history. The company's name, by the way, roughly translates to leave luck to heaven, which is appropriate for a company that stumbled through decades of failed businesses before finding the one that worked. Twitter started as Odeo, a podcast directory and network. The business model seemed solid until Apple launched iTunes podcasting in 2005. Suddenly, Apple was doing the same thing, but with the world's largest music platform behind it. Odeo's investors were unhappy. The company was effectively dead. But an engineering manager named Jack Dorsey had been working on a side project, a simple messaging service he called Tol Titrir. The pivot saved the company. The original Odeo investors weren't thrilled, but the thing that started as a distraction became one of the most influential platforms of the following decade. Slack has a similar origin story. It started as Tiny Speck, a gaming company making a massively multiplayer online game called Glitch. The game failed, but the internal communication tool they'd built to coordinate development was incredible. They pivoted entirely to selling that tool. The game nobody played led to the communication platform that millions of people use daily. And then there's YouTube. The original concept was a video dating site. The tagline was, "Tune in, hook up." People were supposed to upload videos of themselves looking for romantic connections. Nobody used it for dating, so they opened it to all videos. 21 months later, Google bought it for $1.65 billion. The Pivot Masters show us that the first idea doesn't have to be the right idea. Sometimes the thing that saves you is the thing you built along the way. The Acqui-Hired graveyard. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from loving a product and then watching it die after an acquisition. The company gets bought, the founders get rich, and the product that users actually cared about gets slowly or quickly killed. The tech industry is full of these graves. Google Reader launched in 2005 and quickly became the dominant RSS reader. For people who followed blogs and news through RSS feeds, Reader was essential. It synced across devices. It had a clean interface. It worked. On July 1st, 2013, Google killed it. After 7 years and reportedly 129 million users, the official explanation was declining usage. But the real reason seems to be that RSS threatened Google's advertising model. When people read content through RSS, they consumed it without visiting the original website, without seeing ads. Google was also pushing Google Plus at the time and wanted to move users towards social features. Here's the irony. The same day Reader died, internal metrics showed that Google Plus was driving less web traffic than Reader had been. They killed the more successful product. For a lot of people, Google Reader's death marked the end of the old internet. The internet where you followed things directly instead of through algorithmic feeds. Vine was Twitter's video platform. They acquired it in 2012 before it even launched for $30 million. Short looping videos, 6 seconds maximum. It was silly and creative and launched entire careers. By 2016, Twitter killed it. Uploads stopped. The archive stuck around until 2019. Then that was gone too. Vine had 200 million active users when it died. It created celebrities like Logan Paul and King Bach. The format it pioneered eventually became TikTok. The saying now is Vine walked so TikTok could run. A platform with hundreds of millions of users killed because Twitter couldn't figure out how to make money from it. Dark Sky was widely considered the best weather app available. Accurate precipitation predictions down to the minute. Clean design, reliable forecasts. Apple acquired it in 2020 and immediately killed the Android version. They also stopped licensing weather data to third-party apps. Users who had relied on Dark Sky were told to use Apple Weather instead. Years later, people still complain that Apple Weather isn't as good as Dark Sky was. Sunrise Calendar was a beautiful calendar app that synced across platforms and worked the way people actually wanted calendars to work. Microsoft bought it in 2015 for around $100 million. Within a year, they announced Sunrise would be discontinued. Its features would be rolled into Outlook. The pattern is always the same. Small company builds something people love. Big company acquires it. Big company kills it. Users are left wondering why the thing they cared about had to die. The Phoenix rises. Not every dying company stays dead. Some of the most remarkable stories in tech are the comebacks. Companies that everyone wrote off, that came within weeks of bankruptcy, and somehow survived to become bigger than ever. Apple in 1997 is the canonical example. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple after being pushed out a decade earlier, the company was 90 days away from running out of cash. Not 90 days from trouble. 90 days from literally not being able to make payroll. Jobs slashed the product line from dozens of products down to 4. Desktop consumer, desktop professional, portable consumer, portable professional. That was it. Everything else got canceled. Then something unexpected happened. Microsoft invested $150 million in Apple. The surface story was that Microsoft was helping a struggling competitor. The real story is more interesting. Apple had documented evidence that Microsoft had stolen code from QuickTime for their Windows video software. The investment was actually settlement money. Microsoft was paying to make the lawsuit go away. There was also an antitrust angle. Microsoft was facing a Department of Justice investigation. By keeping Apple alive, they could point to Apple as proof that the PC market still had competition. Bill Gates appeared on a giant screen at Macworld to announce the investment. The audience booed. But the money bought Apple time. From there, Jobs rebuilt the company. iMac, iPod, iPhone, from 90 days away from bankruptcy to the world's first trillion-dollar company. AMD's comeback is more recent and arguably more dramatic. In 2011, AMD launched the Bulldozer architecture. It was supposed to compete with Intel's processors. Instead, it performed about 43% worse while costing more. Analysts predicted AMD would be bankrupt by 2020. Lisa Su became CEO in 2014. She brought in Jim Keller, one of the best chip architects in the industry, to design a new architecture called Zen. The first Zen-based Ryzen processors launched in 2017. They were competitive with Intel for the first time in years. Each subsequent generation got better. By January 2026, data from German retailers showed AMD with 95.3% market share versus Intel's 4.7% for DIY desktop CPUs. The company that was supposed to go bankrupt now dominates the market that Intel owned for decades. Lego nearly went bankrupt in 2003. They were about $1 billion in debt after diversifying into theme parks and clothing and other ventures that had nothing to do with plastic bricks. The turnaround came from focusing on what they actually did well: cut the workforce, discontinue unpopular product lines, secure licensing deals for Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, and other properties that made Lego sets collectible. Today, Lego is one of the most valuable toy companies in the world. Marvel filed for bankruptcy in 1996. Declining comic and trading card sales had destroyed the business. The idea that Marvel would become the most valuable film franchise in history would have seemed absurd. The turnaround started with X-Men in 2000, which proved superhero movies could work. Then Spider-Man, then the MCU. Disney eventually acquired Marvel for $4 billion. The characters that couldn't sustain a comic book company now generate billions per year. The Phoenix Rises archetype is hopeful. It suggests that being down isn't the same as being out. Sometimes the companies that nearly die are the ones that emerge strongest. The silent giants. There are companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars that most people have never heard of. They're not consumer brands. They don't advertise, but they're essential to everything in tech. TSMC is the most important company you've probably never thought about. They manufacture approximately 90% of the world's most advanced chips. Apple, AMD, Nvidia, Qualcomm, all of them depend on TSMC to actually build their processor designs. TSMC's market cap is around $1.6 trillion. Any disruption to their operations would, quote, trigger a catastrophic ripple effect across global technology, unquote. That's not hyperbole. If TSMC's fabs went offline, there would be a global shortage of phones, computers, cars, and basically every electronic device. ASML is even more specialized. They're the only company in the world that makes EUV lithography machines. Extreme ultraviolet lithography. It's the technology required to print transistors small enough for cutting-edge chips. ASML has a complete monopoly on this technology. Each machine costs over $200 million and requires multiple planes to ship. Without ASML, TSMC, Samsung, and Intel couldn't produce leading-edge processors. Period. Their market position is 90% of the lithography market overall and 100% of EUV. ARM Holdings designs processor architectures and licenses them to other companies. They don't actually manufacture anything, but virtually every smartphone processor in the world is based on ARM designs. When you use your phone, you're using ARM technology. When you drive a modern car, you're using ARM technology. They're everywhere and invisible. These silent giants are fascinating because they wield enormous power without any public profile. Most people couldn't name them, but their products touch everyone's lives every day. The fallen empires. Some companies that once dominated their industries are now irrelevant or gone entirely. These fallen empires remind us that no position is permanent. BlackBerry made the first successful smartphone. Before the iPhone, serious business people carried BlackBerries, the physical keyboard, the secure messaging, the reputation for reliability. Then the iPhone launched in 2007 with its touchscreen and app store. BlackBerry's leadership dismissed it. Who would want to type on glass? By 2016, BlackBerry had essentially exited the smartphone market entirely. The company that defined mobile business communication was reduced to licensing its brand to other manufacturers. Yahoo was the internet in the late 90s, the dominant portal, the most visited website, worth over $100 billion at its peak. We already covered their missed opportunities with Google and Facebook, but the decline went beyond that. Poor leadership, failed acquisitions, an inability to decide whether they were a media company or a technology company. In 2016, Verizon bought Yahoo's core business for $4.48 billion. A company that was once worth over $100 billion sold for less than $5 billion. MySpace was the largest social network in the world before Facebook. In 2006, it was the most visited website in the United States. Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation bought it for $580 million. Then Facebook happened. MySpace couldn't adapt. By 2011, it sold for $35 million, a 94% loss. Kodak invented the digital camera, literally invented it. An engineer at Kodak built the first digital camera in 1975. Management looked at the invention and decided it threatened their film business. They buried it. 20 years later, digital cameras destroyed the film industry, and Kodak went bankrupt. The fallen empires teach us that past success doesn't guarantee future relevance, and that sometimes the thing that destroys you is the thing you invented but refused to embrace. The forever beta. Some products live in a perpetual state of not quite finished. The forever beta. Products that work, that have millions of users, but somehow never reach official version 1.0. Gmail is the most famous example. It launched in beta on April 1st, 2004, April Fool's Day. People thought it was a joke because the storage limit was so much larger than competitors. Gmail stayed in beta for over 5 years, until July 2009. During that time, it accumulated over 100 million users, a product with 100 million users, still officially in beta. Google co-founder Larry Page later admitted the beta label was, quote, arbitrary, unquote, and about, quote, messaging and branding, unquote. In 2008, 45% of all Google products were technically in beta. The forever beta became a Silicon Valley tradition: launch fast, fix things later. The label gives you cover when things break. The one-hit wonders. Some companies are famous for exactly one thing. They may have tried to expand, they may have had other products, but in the public consciousness, they're defined by a single hit. GoPro made action cameras. That's it. They've tried to expand into drones, into media, into being a broader lifestyle brand. But when people think of GoPro, they think of small cameras you attach to helmets. The company went public in 2014 at a valuation of nearly $3 billion. By 2016, the stock had crashed 80%. Smartphone cameras got good enough that the dedicated action camera market shrank. Fitbit made fitness trackers before Apple Watch dominated the market. They had other products, but Fitbit meant one thing. Google eventually acquired them for $2.1 billion, mostly for the health data and technology rather than the brand. The one-hit wonders are cautionary tales about diversification. When your entire company depends on one product category, you're vulnerable to anything that disrupts that category. The hardware graveyards. Some companies generate entire graveyards of discontinued products. Google is particularly famous for this. There's a website called Killed by Google that tracks every product Google has discontinued. As of late 2024, the count was over 290 products and services. A study found that Google had killed 51.5% of everything they'd ever launched. Google Reader, obviously, but also Google+, Google Inbox, Google Allo, Google Hangouts, Google Play Music, Google Stadia, Google Glass for consumers, Nest Secure, Chromecast Audio, and hundreds more. The pattern is so consistent that it's become a running joke. Don't get attached to Google products because they might not exist next year. Amazon has a smaller but equally dedicated hardware graveyard. The Fire Phone was a spectacular failure. The Echo Show had multiple discontinued versions. Amazon Astro, the home robot, never found a market. The hardware graveyards reveal something about how big tech companies approach innovation. They launch lots of things, see what sticks, and kill everything else. Good for experimentation, frustrating for users who adopted the products that got killed. The patent trolls. Some companies exist primarily to sue other companies. They acquire patents not to build products, but to extract licensing fees from companies that actually make things. These are the patent trolls, officially called non-practicing entities or NPEs. The most aggressive patent trolls buy broad, vague patents and then sue anyone whose product might possibly infringe. The targets are often smaller companies that can't afford lengthy legal battles. It's often cheaper to settle than to fight, even if you'd win. Estimates suggest that patent troll lawsuits cost the U.S. economy around $29 billion annually. That's money going to lawyers and settlements instead of actual innovation. Various reforms have tried to address the problem, but patent trolls remain a constant tax on anyone trying to build technology products. They're an archetype no one wants, but everyone has to deal with. And those are the archetypes, the vaporware kings who promise and never deliver, the pivot masters who find success through reinvention, the beloved products killed after acquisition, the companies that rise from near death, the invisible giants that make everything possible. the fallen empires that remind us nothing lasts forever. Once you see these patterns, you'll start recognizing them everywhere. The tech industry keeps producing the same characters in different costumes. Quick thing before we continue. If you're enjoying this so far and want to see more long-form tech content like this, subscribing helps us know there's an audience for it. No pressure. All right, now we're going into the iceberg, 8 levels deep, from the stuff everyone knows down to the mysteries that don't have answers. If you're trying to fall asleep, Level 5 might be a good stopping point. Let's start at the surface. Moen Section 3, the Tech Iceberg, Levels 5-8. Fast, all right. Now we're getting into the obscure stuff, the stories that got lost to time or never made headlines in the first place. Level 5, Obscure History. Colossus, the computer kept secret for 30 years. Most people learn that ENIAC, built in 1946 in the United States, was the first electronic computer. That's not true. The world's first programmable electronic computer was Colossus, operational in early 1944 at Bletchley Park in Britain. It was built to break German cipher machines, not Enigma, a different, even more complex encryption system used by German High Command. After the war, the British government didn't just classify Colossus, they destroyed it. Most of the machines were dismantled into pieces so small that their purpose couldn't be inferred. Tommy Flowers, the engineer who designed it, was ordered to burn all of his designs. 273 women who had operated the machines signed the Official Secrets Act, the secret held for 3 decades. It wasn't until 1974 and 75 that information about Colossus began to be declassified. For 30 years, Americans believed ENIAC was first. The history of computing was wrong because a government kept a secret so effectively that even the people who built the machine couldn't talk about it. Gary Kildall and the IBM meeting. Gary Kildall created CP/M, the dominant operating system for early personal computers. He invented the BIOS concept. By most measures, he should have been the Bill Gates of personal computing. The legend says that when IBM came to license his operating system for their new PC, Kildall blew off the meeting to go flying his plane. So IBM went to Microsoft instead, and the rest is history. The reality is different. Kildall was on a business flight delivering software to a customer. He wasn't being frivolous. His wife Dorothy and their lawyers met with IBM, but negotiations soured over contract terms. IBM wanted to own the operating system outright. Kildall wanted to license it. The deal fell apart over business terms, not because anyone was flying around ignoring meetings. Microsoft didn't even have an operating system at the time. Bill Gates acquired something called QDOS, which stood for Quick and Dirty Operating System, from a local company. He licensed it to IBM and kept the rights to sell it to other PC manufacturers. When the IBM PC launched, PC-DOS cost $40. CP/M86 cost $240. The pricing disparity was devastating. Gary Kildall died in 1994 at age 52. Friends said the constant comparisons to Gates contributed to alcoholism and depression. The man who should have been a billionaire watched someone else take the future he'd helped create. The Fairchild Diaspora. In 1957, 8 engineers quit William Shockley's semiconductor laboratory. Shockley was a genius and a Nobel laureate who was also, by all accounts, terrible to work for. The 8 who left became known as the Traitorous 8. They founded Fairchild Semiconductor. And then, over the following decades, people kept leaving Fairchild to start their own companies. Intel, founded by Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore from Fairchild. AMD, founded by Jerry Sanders from Fairchild. National Semiconductor, Fairchild alumni. The venture capital industry itself traces back to Fairchild. Eugene Kleiner, one of the original 8, co-founded Kleiner Perkins. Don Valentine, who worked at Fairchild, founded Sequoia Capital. By 2014, a study found that 70% of publicly traded tech companies in Silicon Valley could trace their lineage back to Fairchild Semiconductor. The combined value of Fairchild's progeny exceeded $2 trillion. One company, started by 8 engineers who quit their jobs, spawned essentially the entire semiconductor industry, the Nintendo-Sony Betrayal. In 1988, Nintendo and Sony made a deal. Sony would develop a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. It would be called the PlayStation. 2 words, a Nintendo console with Sony CD technology. At the Consumer Electronics Show in June 1991, Sony publicly announced the partnership, the next generation of Nintendo gaming, powered by Sony. The next day, Nintendo announced they were partnering with Philips instead. It was a deliberate public humiliation. Sony found out about the Philips deal at the same time everyone else did, on stage, in front of the press. The real issue was a contract clause that gave Sony control over licensing profits for CD-based games. Nintendo's leadership realized too late that they'd signed a bad deal. Sony's president was furious. He approved a plan from an engineer named Ken Kutaragi to create their own gaming console entirely. If Nintendo didn't want Sony's technology, Sony would compete with Nintendo directly. The PlayStation, now one word, launched in 1994. It sold over 3 times as many units as the Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn combined. The console that dominated gaming for the next 2 decades only existed because Nintendo publicly embarrassed Sony. The betrayal created a competitor. That brings us to level 6, deep rabbit holes. Stories that don't have clean endings. Level 6, deep rabbit hole. Crypto AG, the CIA's encryption company. For over 50 years, a Swiss company called Crypto AG was considered the gold standard in encryption equipment. Governments around the world bought their products to secure their most sensitive communications. In February 2020, declassified documents revealed the truth. Since 1970, Crypto AG had been secretly owned by the CIA and West German intelligence. They bought the company in June 1970 for $5.75 million. The engineers were told to make the encryption weak enough that American and German intelligence could crack it. Over 120 countries used Crypto AG equipment, thinking their communications were secure. They weren't. The intelligence hauls were enormous. During the 1979 Iran hostage crisis, the U.S. was reading Iranian government communications. During the Falklands War in 1982, Britain received vital intelligence about Argentine military positions. South American military dictatorships coordinated Operation Condor using equipment that American intelligence was reading the entire time. An internal CIA document called it, quote, the intelligence coup of the century, unquote. For 50 years, countries thought they were buying security. They were actually buying surveillance. The NSA and dual ECDRBG was a random number generator included in official encryption standards published by NIST in 2006. Random number generation is critical for encryption. If you can predict the random numbers, you can break the encryption. In 2007, 2 researchers presented a paper at the crypto conference pointing out that dual ECDRBG had a potential backdoor. If someone knew certain secret values that weren't disclosed, they could predict the supposedly random numbers. Everyone assumed this was theoretical. Surely nobody would actually put a backdoor in an official encryption standard. Then the Snowden documents leaked in 2013. One document revealed that the NSA had worked to become the, quote, sole editor, unquote, of the dual ECDRBG standard. In December 2013, Reuters reported that the NSA had paid RSA Security, a major encryption company, $10 million to make dual ECDRBG the default random number generator in their products. The theoretical backdoor wasn't theoretical. The NSA had apparently put a weakness into an official encryption standard, paid a private company to use it by default, and let everyone believe their encryption was secure. Jim Gray's disappearance. Jim Gray was a computer scientist who won the Turing Award, the highest honor in computing. He spent most of his career at Microsoft Research, working on database systems and distributed computing. On January 28, 2007, Gray sailed his boat out of San Francisco Bay to scatter his mother's ashes near the Farallon Islands. He went alone. He never came back. His boat was never found. The search that followed was unprecedented. Digital Globe redirected commercial satellites to photograph the ocean. NASA flew reconnaissance aircraft. Amazon Mechanical Turk was used to crowdsource analysis of satellite imagery. 12,000 volunteers sorted through 560,000 images. The irony was that the search techniques being used were exactly the kind of work Jim Gray had pioneered. Large-scale distributed computing, crowdsourced analysis, processing massive amounts of data from multiple sources. No trace of Gray or his boat was ever found. The mystery remains unsolved. We're now in unverified territory, stories that are persistent but hard to fully confirm. Take these with appropriate skepticism. Level 7. Unverified but persistent. Intel Management Engine. Every Intel processor made since 2008 contains a subsystem called the Intel Management Engine. It runs independently of the main CPU. It has access to system memory, the network stack, and peripherals. It operates even when the computer appears to be turned off. Intel says it's for remote management and security features. System administrators can use it to manage computers remotely. Security researchers have been concerned about it for years. The management engine runs its own operating system on a separate processor embedded in the chip. Most users can't disable it. You can turn off your computer, and the management engine is still running. In 2017, researchers discovered that the NSA had an undocumented way to disable the management engine called the HAP bit, High Assurance Platform. The government had a way to turn it off that wasn't available to the public. Nobody outside Intel and presumably intelligence agencies knows everything the management engine can do. It's a black box running inside every Intel computer. Some security-focused companies like Purism have worked on ways to disable it, but for most people, there's an autonomous computer inside your computer that you can't control. Carrier IQ. In November 2011, a security researcher discovered hidden software called Carrier IQ on his Android phone. Further investigation revealed it was installed on over 141 million phones. The software logged keystrokes, text messages, location data, and web searches. It was installed by carriers and phone manufacturers without user knowledge or consent. Carrier IQ claimed it was diagnostic software for improving network performance, but the data collection went far beyond what would be needed for diagnostics. After the public outcry, the software was largely removed from devices. But for years, phones had been shipping with hidden surveillance software that users never knew about. And finally, we reach the abyss, the unsolved mysteries, the things that still don't have answers. If you're still awake, let's see how deep this goes. Level 8, The Abyss, Cicada 3. 301. On January 4th, 2012, a cryptic image appeared on the random board of a website called 4chan. It was a message. It said, quote, "We are looking for highly intelligent individuals. To find them, we have devised a test. There is a message hidden in this image. Find it, and it will lead you on the road to finding us. We look forward to meeting the few that will make it all the way through. Good luck." Unquote. What followed was one of the most elaborate puzzle trails ever created. The puzzles required knowledge of cryptography, steganography, number theory, classical literature, music theory, and programming. Solving one puzzle would lead to another, each more complex than the last. Here's where it gets strange. Some clues led to physical locations around the world. QR codes on posters in Spain, Russia, the United States, France, and Japan. Someone was placing physical clues in cities across multiple continents. The puzzle trail led to something called the Liber Primus, a 58-page book written entirely in runes. Many pages remain unsolved to this day. People who claimed to have completed the puzzle were reportedly asked about their views on information, freedom, privacy, and rejection of censorship. They were invited to private forums. Who created Cicada 3301? No one knows. Why did they create it? No one knows. What happens to the people who solve it? No one knows. The puzzles have reappeared multiple times over the years, suggesting an ongoing organization. But their identity and purpose remain completely unknown. The Bitcoin Genesis block, Satoshi Nakamoto, published the Bitcoin Whitepaper on October 31st, 2008, 2 weeks after officials announced a $2 trillion bank bailout. The first Bitcoin block, the Genesis block, was mined on January 3, 2009. Embedded in that block was a message, quote, "The Times, 03/, Jan/2009. Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks, unquote. A newspaper headline. A direct commentary on the financial system that Nakamoto was trying to replace. But there's something strange about the timing. Block 1 wasn't mined until January 9th. 6 days later. Theories vary. Maybe Nakamoto was testing the system. Maybe the delay was intentional, a reference to the 6 days of creation in Genesis. Maybe Nakamoto wanted the timestamps to prove the system wasn't pre-mined before the announced date. Then, in April 2011, Nakamoto sent a final email saying, quote, "I've moved on to other things," unquote, and disappeared. Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin holdings are estimated at about 1.1 million BTC, at current prices worth approximately $99 billion. Those coins have never moved since 2010. Either Nakamoto lost access to them, or they're deliberately leaving $100 billion untouched. No one knows who Nakamoto is. No one knows if they're alive. No one knows why they walked away. Dead Internet Theory. The dead internet theory suggests that most internet content since around 2016 is generated by bots and AI rather than humans. That genuine human interaction on the internet has been replaced by manufactured content and artificial engagement. It sounds like paranoia. But there are kernels of truth. About 50% of all internet traffic in 2022 and 2023 was bot-generated according to cybersecurity research. AI-generated content has proliferated dramatically. Social media platforms are flooded with content farms and synthetic engagement. In 2023, images of something called Shrimp Jesus went viral on Facebook. AI-generated images of Jesus Christ, holding or surrounded by shrimp. They accumulated millions of likes from what appeared to be automated or farmed accounts. No one claims the internet is literally dead. But the proportion of genuine human content versus manufactured content is shifting. How much of what you see online was created by a person versus generated by a system? The dead internet theory is probably overstated, but the underlying concern about the authenticity of online content is real. The lost technologies. Throughout tech history, there are inventions that appeared and then vanished. Technologies that seemed revolutionary and then were never heard from again. Some were probably frauds. Some were bought by larger companies and buried. Some may have actually worked, but couldn't be manufactured at scale. The problem is distinguishing between legitimate lost innovations and wishful thinking. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but it's also not evidence of suppression. The abyss is full of maybe. That's what makes it the abyss. And that's as deep as the iceberg goes, from the surface level, stuff everyone knows, down through the enthusiast territory and industry insider knowledge, into the obscure history and rabbit holes, past the unverified rumors, and finally into the unsolved mysteries. If you made it through all 8 levels, you've gone deeper into tech lore than most people ever will. Let's surface for a while. The next section is more straightforward, dramatic, but straightforward. The worst product failures from companies that definitely should have known better. On Section 3, the Tech Iceberg, Levels 1 to 4. The iceberg format works like this. At the surface, we have the things everyone knows, the stuff that comes up in casual conversation. Everyone's heard of planned obsolescence. Everyone knows tech companies track everything. As we go deeper, the knowledge becomes more specialized. Level 2 is casual deep cuts. Things that require a bit more context, but aren't exactly secrets. Level 3 is enthusiast territory, the stuff people who really follow tech would know. Level 4 is industry insider knowledge, things you'd learn from working in the business. And then it gets weird. Level 5 is obscure history, stories that got lost to time or never made headlines. Level 6 is deep rabbit holes, investigations that don't have clean endings. Level 7 is unverified but persistent. Rumors that won't die but can't be fully confirmed. And Level 8 is the abyss, unsolved mysteries and unexplained events. By the time we get to Level 8, we're firmly in keep you up at night territory. But let's start at the top, the surface level, the stuff everyone knows, but maybe not the full story behind it. Level 1, the surface, planned obsolescence and the Phoebus cartel. Everyone knows that products aren't built to last forever. Planned obsolescence. The idea that companies design things to fail, so you'll buy replacements. But did you know there's documented proof of a cartel that deliberately made products worse? On December 23, 1924, representatives from the world's largest light bulb manufacturers met in Geneva: General Electric, Osram, Philips, and others. They formed something called the Phoebus Cartel. Their explicit goal was to make light bulbs fail faster. Before the cartel, light bulbs routinely lasted over 2,500 hours. The cartel mandated a maximum lifespan of 1,000 hours. Any manufacturer who produced bulbs lasting longer than that was fined. They literally penalized quality. The cartel operated until World War II, disrupted international business, but the engineering knowledge to make longer-lasting bulbs existed. They just chose not to use it. The proof that this was unnecessary sits in a fire station in Livermore, California. The centennial bulb has been burning nearly continuously since 1901, over 1 million hours, a bulb from before the cartel, still working more than a century later. Planned obsolescence isn't a conspiracy theory. There's a signed agreement from 1924 proving that major companies coordinated to make products worse. Apple Batterygate. In late 2016, iPhone 6 owners started reporting that their devices were randomly shutting down at 30% battery. The phones would show plenty of charge and then just die. Apple quietly released iOS 10.2.1, which, quote, fixed, unquote, the shutdown issue. What they didn't tell anyone was how they fixed it. The update secretly throttled processor speeds on older phones. Your phone wasn't dying anymore because it wasn't being allowed to run at full speed. Apple never disclosed this. For over a year, people thought their phones were just getting slower with age. The perception that iPhones slowed down when new models came out seemed confirmed. Then in December 2017, a benchmarking company called Geekbench published analysis showing the pattern. Older phones were being deliberately slowed down. The secret was out. Apple's explanation was that they were protecting phones with degraded batteries from unexpected shutdowns. The throttling was a feature, not a bug. But the fact that they did it secretly, without telling users, destroyed trust. The fallout was significant. 32 class action lawsuits. France fined Apple 25 million euros. Total U.S. settlement between $310 and $500 million. In January 2025, checks for $92.17 per device were sent out. The lesson wasn't that battery degradation is real. Everyone knew that. The lesson was that Apple secretly changed how phones worked without telling anyone. Dark patterns. Dark patterns are user interface designs that trick people into doing things they didn't intend. The term was coined by a British designer named Harry Brignall on July 28, 2010. A 2019 study found 1,818 dark patterns across just 11,000 shopping websites. The tricks are everywhere. Checkboxes that are pre-selected to sign you up for newsletters. Unsubscribe flows that take multiple clicks and guilt trips. Countdown timers that reset when you refresh the page. Hidden fees that appear only at checkout. One category is literally called privacy zuckering. Named after Mark Zuckerberg, it means tricking users into sharing more data than they intended. Dark patterns aren't illegal in most cases. They're just manipulative. The entire field of user experience design includes people whose job is making interfaces easy to use, and people whose job is making interfaces that trick you. The garage myth. We love stories about tech billionaires starting in garages. Apple started in a garage, Google started in a garage, Amazon started in a garage. The implication is that anyone with a good idea and determination can become successful. The American dream. The reality is more complicated. Jeff Bezos' parents invested $245,573 in Amazon in 1995. That's not garage scrappiness. That's substantial family wealth providing runway. Bill Gates' mother, Mary Gates, was president of United Way. She happened to serve on a board with John Opel, the CEO of IBM. That connection helped Microsoft get the IBM PC contract that made them. Mark Zuckerberg went to Phillips Exeter Academy, a boarding school that currently costs about $57,000 per year. His parents hired a private software tutor. Warren Buffett's father was a U.S. congressman. This isn't to say these people aren't talented or hardworking. They clearly are. But the garage myth obscures the advantages that made their success possible. Starting capital, connections, education, safety nets. The surface-level story is inspiring. The full story is more complicated. That covers the surface. Now, let's go a little deeper into things that require a bit more context. Level 2, Casual Deep Cut. Why Google really killed Google Reader. The official explanation was declining usage. Fewer people were using RSS readers, so Google shut it down. The real reason appears to be strategic. RSS threatened Google's business model. When people read content through RSS feeds, they consumed it without visiting the original websites, without seeing the ads on those websites, without generating the data that Google used for ad targeting. Google wanted people using Google+, their social network. They wanted social sharing and engagement, not quiet RSS subscriptions. Reader was pushing in the opposite direction. The irony is that Google+ failed spectacularly. The same day Reader was killed, internal metrics showed Google+ driving less engagement than Reader had. They killed the successful product to promote the unsuccessful one. For people who loved RSS, Reader's death marked a turning point. The shift from the open, feed-based internet to the algorithm-controlled, platform-dominated internet accelerated after Reader died. Yahoo's billion-dollar blunders. We touched on this before, but the full timeline is remarkable. In 1998, Yahoo could have bought Google for $1 million. They said no. In 2002, they offered $3 billion. Google countered with $5 billion. Yahoo walked away. In 2006, Yahoo was in talks to buy Facebook. The deal was reportedly going to happen at $1 billion. At the last minute, Yahoo's board tried to renegotiate down to $850 million. Mark Zuckerberg walked away. In 2008, Microsoft offered to buy Yahoo for $44.6 billion. Yahoo's board said no, holding out for more. In 2016, Verizon bought Yahoo's core business for $4.48 billion, less than what Microsoft was offering 8 years earlier, less than what Google wanted 10 years before that. The company that could have owned both Google and Facebook ended up worth less than either, was asking at the time. Why Windows skipped version 9. After Windows 8, Microsoft released Windows 10. There was no Windows 9. The official story is that they wanted to signal a big leap forward. Windows 10 was supposed to be a major change, not just an incremental update. The real reason, according to a Reddit user who claimed to be a Microsoft developer, is more mundane and more funny. Thousands of legacy programs were written with code that checked for Windows versions using shortcuts. Code that said something like, if the version starts with Windows 9, then treat it as Windows 95 or Windows 98. A new Windows 9 would break all of those programs. Software written in the 90s that was still running would suddenly think it was on a 20-year-old operating system. So, Microsoft skipped 9 entirely. There's also the cultural element. In Japan, the number 9 sounds similar to the word for torture, not great marketing. Steve Jobs and the license plate loophole. For years, Steve Jobs drove a silver Mercedes SL 55 AMG with no license plates. This was completely legal. California law at the time gave new car owners up to 6 months to get plates. Jobs made a deal with a leasing company to swap his Mercedes for an identical model every 6 months. He never kept the same car long enough to need plates. The loophole existed because the law assumed people would want to register their cars eventually. It didn't anticipate someone deliberately rotating vehicles to avoid ever needing plates. California closed the Steve Jobs loophole in 2019. New cars now come with temporary plates. The origin of sent from my iPhone. Every iPhone comes with a default email signature that says sent from my iPhone. This might seem like a small detail. It's actually brilliant marketing. With over 2.2 billion iPhones sold since 2007, each one potentially serving as a micro billboard for Apple. Every email sent from an iPhone advertises the device to the recipient. Research has shown that emails with the sent from my iPhone signature are perceived more favorably when they contain errors. Recipients are more forgiving of typos and brief responses because they assume the sender is on the go. Apple got free advertising on billions of emails and gave iPhone users a built-in excuse for sending short messages. That's good design. Still with me? Good. Now we're getting into territory that most casual observers never encounter. Level 3. Enthusiast territory. Intel's Cripple AMD compiler. For decades, Intel made the best compilers in the industry. A compiler is software that converts human-readable code into instructions a computer can execute. Intel's compiler was particularly good at optimizing code for Intel processors. Here's what most people didn't know. It was also designed to run slower on AMD processors. The compiler checked the CPU's vendor ID string. If it didn't say genuine Intel, the compiler defaulted to the slowest possible code path. Even when AMD chips supported the same faster instructions, the Intel compiler refused to use them. This wasn't a bug, it was deliberate. AMD filed an antitrust lawsuit in 2005. In 2009, Intel paid AMD $1.25 billion to settle. The European Union fined Intel €1.06 billion. The FTC required Intel to disclose the compiler bias. For years, benchmarks made Intel look better than AMD, partly because the benchmarks were compiled with Intel's compiler. The playing field was rigged. The Xerox PARC heist. The common story is that Steve Jobs visited Xerox PARC, saw the graphical user interface, and stole it to build the Macintosh. The reality is more nuanced. Apple paid for access. They gave Xerox 100,000 shares of pre-IPO Apple stock, worth about $1 million at the time, in exchange for a demonstration. And the Xerox Alto had already been demonstrated to over 2,000 people by 1975. It wasn't a secret. Xerox just wasn't doing anything with it. What Apple did was significantly improve on what they saw. Xerox had windows, but they couldn't overlap. Apple added overlapping windows. Apple added drag and drop. Apple added the trash can for deleting files. Apple added the menu bar. Bill Gates saw the Mac and said something that became famous. Quote, "Well, Steve, I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already stolen it," unquote. Both Apple and Microsoft took ideas from Xerox. Xerox saw a graphical user interface and saw a research project. Apple and Microsoft saw the future. The Microsoft Halloween documents. On October 31st, 1998, confidential Microsoft memos were leaked to the press. They became known as the Halloween documents. The memos revealed Microsoft's internal strategy for dealing with Linux and open-source software. Microsoft internally admitted that Linux was, quote, technologically competitive, unquote. They outlined a strategy called Embrace, Extend, Extinguish. The idea was to adopt open standards, then add proprietary extensions, then use those extensions to push out competitors. They discussed using patents and proprietary protocols to lock customers in. The documents were embarrassing because they contradicted Microsoft's public statements about open competition. Here's the irony. 25 years later, Microsoft owns GitHub, the largest host of open source code. They're one of the largest contributors to Linux. They run Azure, their cloud platform, heavily on Linux servers. The company that wrote secret memos about destroying open source is now one of its biggest supporters. Times change. This is where we leave the enthusiasts behind and enter industry insider territory. Level 4, Industry Insider, the Osborne Effect. In 1981, Osborne Computer released the Osborne One, the first commercially successful portable computer. It weighed 24 pounds and cost $17.95, which was actually reasonable for the time. By late 1981, they were shipping 10,000 units per month. Then Adam Osborne made a mistake that would get named after him. In early 1983, with sales going strong, Osborne pre-announced the next generation products, the Osborne Executive and the Osborne Vixen. Better specs, better design, coming soon. Sales of the current models collapsed overnight. Why buy the Osborne One when something better was coming? The problem was, the new models weren't ready yet. They were still prototypes. Osborne had pre-announced products that wouldn't ship for months. By September 1983, Osborne Computer filed for bankruptcy. The fastest-growing company in Silicon Valley had destroyed itself in 18 months. The Osborne effect is now a cautionary term in the industry. Announcing a future product too early can kill sales of your current product. If people know something better is coming, they stop buying what's available now. Why Microsoft really saved Apple. In 1997, Microsoft invested $150 million in Apple. Steve Jobs announced it at Macworld with Bill Gates appearing on a giant screen via video link. The audience booed. The surface story was that Microsoft was helping a struggling competitor survive. The real reasons were more complicated. First, Apple had documented evidence that Microsoft had stolen code from QuickTime. The lawsuit was going to be expensive and embarrassing. The $150 million was basically settlement money to make the legal problem go away. Second, Microsoft was facing an antitrust investigation from the Department of Justice. By keeping Apple alive, Microsoft could point to them as proof that the operating system market still had competition. Apple's survival helped Microsoft's legal defense. Third, Microsoft Office for Mac was actually profitable. About 8 million Mac users were paying for Office. Letting Apple die would mean losing those customers. The investment worked out well for Microsoft. They sold the stock in 2003 for about $550 million, a 260% return in 6 years. If they had held that stock until today, it would be worth approximately $184 billion. Stack ranking and Microsoft's lost decade. From about 2000 to 2013, Microsoft used a performance evaluation system called stack ranking. The idea was that managers had to rate employees on a curve. A fixed percentage had to be rated as top performers, a fixed percentage as average, and a fixed percentage as below average. Every team, regardless of how good they were, had to identify underperformers. The effect on culture was devastating. Employees started competing against their teammates instead of helping each other. If you help someone else succeed, they might get the good rating instead of you. Talented people avoided working with other talented people because being on a team of stars meant someone had to lose. Innovation suffered. People protected their own projects instead of sharing ideas. Risk-taking decreased because failure meant a bad rating. Former employees described it as the system that made Microsoft a place where getting a good rating mattered more than building good products. Satya Nadella eliminated stack ranking after becoming CEO. But the system had shaped Microsoft's culture for over a decade. If you've made it this far, you're clearly into this stuff. Consider liking the video so the algorithm knows to recommend it to other people who'd appreciate it. Now, let's keep going deeper. The next 4 levels are where things get strange. Level 5 is obscure history that most people have never heard of. Level 6 is deep rabbit holes without clean endings. Level 7 is unverified but persistent rumors. And Level 8 is the abyss. If you're trying to fall asleep, now might be a good stopping point. Still here? All right, let's go. It's Section 4, Worst Product Failures. Every company makes mistakes, but some mistakes are spectacular. These aren't stories about small startups that tried something and failed. These are stories about the biggest, most well-resourced companies in the world getting it catastrophically wrong. Phones that exploded, social networks that no one used, streaming services that lasted 6 months, acquisitions that destroyed billions in value. The common thread is that these companies had the resources to do better. They had the talent, the money, the data, and they still failed. Let's start with the explosions. Samsung Galaxy Note 7. We touched on this in the regulations section, but the full story of the Note 7 is worth telling in detail. In 2016, Samsung was desperate to beat Apple. The iPhone 7 was coming that fall, and Samsung wanted to get ahead of it. They pushed the Note 7 out as fast as possible. The phone looked great on paper. 3,500 milliamp hour battery, 7.9 millimeters thin. Gorgeous display. The reviews were positive. 14 days after launch, Samsung announced a recall. Phones were catching fire. The problem was the battery. They'd squeezed a high-capacity battery into a thin case without adequate testing. The design left insufficient tolerance for manufacturing variations. Some batteries had electrodes that touched, causing short circuits and thermal runaway. Samsung issued replacement phones. Problem solved. Except the replacement phones started catching fire, too. On October 5th, a replacement Note 7 caught fire on a Southwest Airlines flight before takeoff. The phone was supposed to be fixed. It wasn't. Here's what the investigation found. Samsung had been using batteries from two suppliers, Samsung SDI and Amperex Technology Limited. The original Samsung SDI batteries had the design flaw. When Samsung rushed to get replacement batteries, they went to Amperex. But the Amperex batteries had a different manufacturing defect, welding burrs that penetrated the insulation. Both suppliers had produced defective batteries. The replacement phones were just as dangerous as the originals. On October 11th, Samsung killed the entire product line. The Note 7 became the first consumer device banned from all U.S. flights. The recall retrieved about 97% of devices, one of the most successful recalls in history. Total cost to Samsung was approximately $17 billion. The phone that was supposed to prove Samsung's superiority became a punchline. Note 7 became synonymous with exploding phones. Google Plus. Google Plus was supposed to be Google's answer to Facebook. Launched in 2011 with enormous resources and integration across all of Google's products. The stats tell the story. Average user spent only 3.3 minutes per month on Google+. For comparison, Facebook users spent over 7 hours per month on Facebook. 90% of user sessions on Google+ lasted less than 5 seconds. People would accidentally arrive, realize where they were, and leave immediately. But Google didn't give up easily. They forced Google+ integration across their entire ecosystem. To comment on YouTube, you needed a Google+ account. To leave reviews, Google+. New Gmail users were automatically signed up. The forced integration alienated users without making Google+ popular. It just made people resent being pushed toward a social network they didn't want to use. In 2018, a bug in the Google+ API was discovered that had exposed private profile data for years. Rather than deal with the security implications, Google announced they were shutting down the consumer version entirely. The social network that was supposed to challenge Facebook died with a whimper. Google's own employees reportedly described management as, quote, separated from reality, unquote, when it came to Google+. Google Stadia. On July 29, 2022, Google tweeted, quote, Stadia is not shutting down, unquote. On September 29, 2022, Google announced Stadia would shut down in January 2023, 2 months. Between saying they weren't shutting down and announcing the shutdown, Stadia was Google's cloud gaming platform. The pitch was that you could play high-end games without buying expensive hardware. The processing would happen on Google's servers and stream to your device. The technology actually worked reasonably well, but Google never built a compelling game library. They never attracted enough subscribers, and critically, no one trusted that Google would keep supporting it. The killed by Google problem had become severe enough that potential customers were hesitant to invest in any new Google product. Why buy games on Stadia if Google might kill it in 2 years? They killed it in 3 years. Google did something almost unprecedented. They issued full refunds for all Stadia hardware and game purchases. Everyone got their money back. The refunds limited the financial damage to customers, but confirmed that betting on Google's new products was risky. The next Google product launch will carry the weight of Stadia and every other killed product. Amazon Fire Phone. Jeff Bezos was personally involved in designing the Fire Phone. He wanted it to have dynamic perspective, a 3D display that tracked your face and adjusted the image, 4 front-facing cameras just for this feature. The phone launched in June 2014 at $649. iPhone prices without iPhone appeal. Dynamic perspective was a gimmick, neat for about 5 minutes, then annoying. The app ecosystem was limited. The integration with Amazon services was aggressive to the point of being intrusive. In the first 25 days, Amazon sold approximately 35,000 units. The iPhone sells millions in launch weekends. Amazon dropped the price to 99 cents with a contract. Still, no one bought it. The Fire Phone resulted in a $170 million write-off. Amazon essentially exited the smartphone market. Jeff Bezos had reportedly overruled engineers who questioned whether anyone actually wanted dynamic perspective. The feature that the CEO insisted on was the feature that doomed the product. Meta's Metaverse. In October 2021, Mark Zuckerberg announced that Facebook was renaming itself Meta and pivoting to the Metaverse. The company would become a metaverse company first and a social media company second. The spending started immediately. Reality Labs, Meta's metaverse division, has posted the following operating losses. 2020, $6.6 billion. 2021, $10.2 billion. 2022, $13.7 billion. 2023, $16.1 billion. 2024, $17.7 billion. Total losses of over $70 billion and counting. And what have they built? The flagship product, Horizon Worlds, was largely empty. Internal data showed that only 9% of worlds created by users were ever visited by more than 50 people. Most worlds were never visited by anyone except the person who made them. Meta's own employees reportedly didn't want to use the products they were building. Mandatory metaverse meetings didn't go well. Zuckerberg has committed to the metaverse vision despite the massive losses. The company's argument is that this is a long-term investment in the next computing platform. The counter-argument is that $70 billion for empty virtual worlds is a spectacular misallocation of resources. Whether Meta's metaverse bet pays off remains to be seen, but the losses so far are unlike anything in tech history. Microsoft Zune. The Zune was Microsoft's attempt to compete with the iPod. Launched in November 2006, it actually wasn't a bad device. Decent screen, Wi-Fi for wireless syncing, a social feature that let you share songs with nearby Zune users. The problem was that by 2006, the iPod was completely dominant. The market had decided. And the Zune's killer feature, sharing songs with other Zune users, required other people to actually have Zunes. The Zune became a punchline. Admitting you owned a Zune became a form of self-deprecating humor. The best Zune story involves a man named Stephen Smith. On launch day, before reviews were even out, Smith got a Zune logo tattooed on his shoulder. Microsoft flew him to Redmond and named him Emperor Zune. As the Zune's reputation declined, Smith became disillusioned. He eventually said, quote, "The thing that pisses me off is that Microsoft is not advancing the Zune software," unquote. He switched to an iPod Touch. Later, he got the Zune tattoo covered up with a different image. Microsoft discontinued the Zune in 2011. The iPod had won, and then smartphones made dedicated music players obsolete anyway. Yahoo's Tumblr disaster. In 2013, Yahoo bought Tumblr for $1.1 billion. CEO Marissa Mayer promised, quote, "We're not going to screw it up," unquote. They screwed it up. By 2015, Yahoo had written down $230 million in Tumblr value. By 2016, another $482 million in write-downs. In 2019, Verizon sold Tumblr to Automatic for $3 million. $3 million. 0.27% of the purchase price. A billion-dollar acquisition turned into a $3 million fire sale. It's one of the worst acquisition outcomes in tech history. HP and the autonomy disaster. In 2011, HP paid $11.1 billion for Autonomy, a British software company. They paid a 64% premium over Autonomy's market price. 13 months later, HP announced an $8.8 billion write-down. They claimed $5 billion of the write-down was linked to, quote, "serious accounting improprieties," unquote, at Autonomy before the acquisition. The Autonomy founder denied everything. Years of litigation followed. HP claimed they'd been defrauded. Autonomy's leadership claimed HP had mismanaged the integration. In 2018, Autonomy's CFO was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 5 years in prison. HP paid $11 billion for a company, wrote off almost $9 billion of it within a year, and spent the next decade in legal battles. The acquisition destroyed almost its entire value essentially overnight. Nokia's burning platform. In 2007, Nokia controlled over 50% of the global smartphone market. They were the dominant force in mobile. Then the iPhone happened. Nokia's response was slow. They stuck with their Symbian operating system, while iOS and Android redefined what smartphones could be. In February 2011, new CEO Stephen Elop sent an internal memo that became famous. He described Nokia as standing on a burning platform. The old world was on fire, and they needed to jump. The memo leaked. The market interpreted it as confirmation that Nokia's current products were worthless. Sales collapsed. The memo that was supposed to rally employees instead told customers to wait for something better. In September 2013, Microsoft bought Nokia's Devices and Services division for €5.4 billion. Stephen Elop, the CEO who wrote the Burning Platform memo, had previously worked at Microsoft. By July 2015, Microsoft wrote off $7.6 billion on the Nokia acquisition, essentially the entire purchase price. Nokia went from market leader to acquisition target to write-off in 8 years. The Burning Platform memo accelerated the decline it was trying to prevent. Quibi. Quibi was a streaming service for short-form premium video, founded by Jeffrey Katzenberg, former Disney executive. CEO was Meg Whitman, former HP CEO and eBay CEO. They raised $1.75 billion from major entertainment companies including Disney, NBC Universal, and Sony. The pitch was premium content in segments of 10 minutes or less, designed for mobile viewing during short breaks. Watch an episode of a show while waiting in line. Quibi launched in April 2020, in the middle of COVID lockdowns, when everyone was stuck at home with big screens and nothing but time. The one thing people didn't need was a mobile-only streaming service optimized for quick viewing during commutes. There were no commutes. Everyone was at home. After the 90-day free trial ended, 92% of users canceled. In October 2020, 6 months after launch, Quibi announced it was shutting down. $1.75 billion, 6 months, gone. Katzenberg initially blamed COVID. Quote, "I attribute everything that has gone wrong to coronavirus," unquote. But the problems were deeper. The content wasn't compelling enough. The mobile-only restriction was annoying. The premise didn't hold up. 6 months from launch to shutdown. It might be the fastest failure of a major funded venture in entertainment history. And those are the failures. Phones that exploded, social networks that no one used, a 62-minute streaming service that raised nearly $2 billion and lasted 6 months. Acquisitions where almost the entire purchase price was written off. These companies had the money, the talent, and the resources. They failed anyway. The failures teach us that resources aren't enough. You also need to be building something people actually want. And sometimes you need to be honest about whether your vision matches reality. Speaking of people who couldn't see eye to eye, let's talk about feuds. In Section 5, Tech Feuds and Rivalries. Tech is competitive. Companies fight for market share. Executives fight for credit. Engineers fight over whose architecture is better. Some of these fights shaped the entire industry. Some of them got personal. Some of them went on for decades. Here are the feuds. Steve Jobs versus Bill Gates. The relationship between Steve Jobs and Bill Gates is one of the most complicated in business history. They were competitors, collaborators, enemies, and in the end, something like friends. In the early 1980s, Microsoft was developing software for the Macintosh. Bill Gates had access to pre-release Mac hardware and software. Then Microsoft announced Windows, a graphical interface that bore a strong resemblance to what Apple was building. Jobs was furious. He called Gates to Apple headquarters for what became a legendary confrontation. Jobs screamed at Gates, quote, "You're ripping us off, I trusted you, and now you're stealing from us," unquote. Gates's response became famous. Quote, "Well, Steve, I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already stolen it," unquote. Both of them had borrowed from Xerox PARC. Gates was pointing out that Jobs' moral high ground was shaky. The feud continued for years. In 1996, Jobs did an interview where he said, quote, "The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste," unquote. But time changes things. In 1997, when Apple was 90 days from bankruptcy, Microsoft invested $150 million. Gates appeared on a giant screen at Macworld. Jobs had to acknowledge the help publicly, and at the end, something shifted. Before Jobs died in October 2011, Gates visited him. They spent hours talking. Gates later wrote a letter to Jobs telling him how he should feel great about what he had accomplished. Jobs' wife Lorene later called Gates to tell him that Steve had kept the letter by his bedside until he died. Decades of rivalry, and it ended with a letter that meant enough to keep. Apple versus Samsung. If Jobs versus Gates was personal, Apple versus Samsung was thermonuclear. When Samsung's Galaxy phones started looking a lot like iPhones, Steve Jobs reportedly declared, quote, "I will spend my last dying breath if I need to, and I will spend every penny of Apple's $40 billion in the bank to right this wrong. I'm going to destroy Android because it's a stolen product. I'm willing to go thermonuclear war on this," unquote. Apple sued Samsung in 2011. The lawsuit spread across multiple countries. Patent claims, trade dress claims, design infringement. It became one of the largest patent disputes in tech history. In 2012, a U.S. jury awarded Apple over $1 billion in damages. The amount was later reduced, appealed, retried, and settled. Here's the irony that makes this feud absurd. Samsung is one of Apple's largest component suppliers. While Apple was suing Samsung for copying the iPhone, Samsung was manufacturing display panels, memory chips, and processors for the iPhone. Apple was suing a company and buying billions of dollars in components from them at the same time. The companies that seemed locked in mortal combat were also deeply intertwined business partners. The thermonuclear war had a demilitarized zone in the supply chain. Intel versus AMD. Intel and AMD have been competitors since AMD was founded in 1969. But the rivalry intensified when Intel started using its market dominance to crush AMD. In the 2000s, Intel had over 80% market share. They used that leverage aggressively. Internal emails revealed that Dell, one of the largest PC manufacturers, received substantial payments from Intel for exclusivity. Intel executives referred to Dell as, quote, "the best friend money can buy," unquote. When AMD tried to compete, Intel cut deals with manufacturers to shut them out. If you wanted Intel's best prices and support, you didn't sell AMD. In 2005, AMD filed an antitrust lawsuit. The evidence was damning. Intel had systematically used their dominance to exclude competition. In 2009, Intel paid AMD $1.25 billion to settle. The European Union fined Intel €1.06 billion. AMD survived, but barely. The bulldozer architecture disaster in 2011 nearly finished them. Then, Ryzen happened. Under Lisa Su's leadership, AMD created processors that were finally competitive with Intel. By 2024 and 2025, AMD was taking market share aggressively. At CES 2026, an AMD executive publicly said, quote, "We knew we built a great part. We didn't know the competitor had built such a horrible one," unquote. After decades of Intel dominance, AMD was finally on top. The rivalry continues, but the positions have reversed. The company that nearly went bankrupt now dominates the DIY processor market. VHS versus Betamax. The original format war. Sony's Betamax launched in 1975. JVC's VHS launched in 1976. Betamax was arguably the better technology, slightly better picture quality, more compact cassettes. VHS won anyway. The reasons are instructive. First, recording time. Betamax initially could only record 60 minutes. VHS could record 2 hours or more. People wanted to record entire movies, not the first hour of movies. Second, price. A Betamax player with 5 tapes cost about $3,000. VHS was around $1,000. The quality difference wasn't worth the price difference for most consumers. Third, licensing. Sony kept Betamax proprietary. JVC licensed VHS freely to other manufacturers. Competition drove VHS prices down and flooded the market with VHS players. There's also the adult film industry angle. The industry chose VHS because of the longer recording times and lower costs. Some historians argue this was decisive. Others say it was a factor, but not the primary one. Whatever the exact reasons, VHS won decisively. Sony eventually conceded and started making VHS players. Sony apparently learned from the experience. When HD DVD challenged Blu-ray in the 2000s, Sony made sure the PlayStation 3 included a Blu-ray drive. Every PS3 was a Blu-ray player. That installed base helped Blu-ray win the next format war. HD DVD versus Blu-ray. The Blu-ray versus HD DVD fight was shorter, but still costly. HD DVD was backed by Toshiba and Microsoft. Blu-ray was backed by Sony and most movie studios. The PlayStation 3 was the secret weapon. By the time HD DVD had 750,000 dedicated players in U.S. homes, Sony had sold 10.5 million PlayStation 3s worldwide. Every one of them was a Blu-ray player. The format war ended on January 4th, 2008, when Warner Bros. Announced they were dropping HD DVD and going Blu-ray exclusively. Within weeks, Toshiba announced they would cease HD DVD production. Here's the irony. Despite winning, Blu-ray never achieved DVD's dominance. Streaming emerged. Physical media declined. DVD still outsells Blu-ray today. Sony won the format war just in time for the format to become less relevant. Linus Torvalds versus NVIDIA. Linus Torvalds created Linux and remains its principal developer. He's famous for being blunt about things he doesn't like. In June 2012, at a talk at Aalto University in Finland, someone asked about NVIDIA's support for Linux. NVIDIA's graphics cards had notoriously poor Linux drivers. Torvalds responded, quote, "NVIDIA has been the single worst company we've ever dealt with," unquote. Then he looked directly at the camera and said, quote, "So, NVIDIA, expletive you," unquote, while raising his middle finger. The clip went viral. It captured years of frustration with NVIDIA's approach to open source. The redemption arc is interesting. By 2024, Torvalds noted that NVIDIA was now doing, quote, "really good work," unquote, on Linux. The AI boom had made Linux support business critical for NVIDIA. Economics accomplished what years of complaints couldn't. The browser wars. The first browser war defined how the internet evolved. In 1994, Netscape Navigator was the dominant browser. Netscape was preparing to go public and looked poised to control how people accessed the internet. Microsoft saw this as an existential threat. On December 7, 1995, Pearl Harbor Day, Bill Gates announced Microsoft's aggressive internet strategy. Microsoft bundled Internet Explorer with Windows for free. They offered deals to OEMs to pre-install IE. An Intel vice president testified that Microsoft's plan was to, quote, "cut off Netscape's air supply," unquote. Bill Gates' deposition during the subsequent antitrust trial became legendary for how evasive it was. He said, quote, "I don't recall," unquote, so often that the judge laughed. Microsoft's evidence videotapes were found to be doctored. In 2000, a judge ruled that Microsoft had violated antitrust laws. The company was nearly broken up. Eventually, they settled, agreeing to modify their practices. Netscape was destroyed in the process. But the browser war had broader consequences. The antitrust scrutiny constrained Microsoft during a critical period. The constraints arguably created space for Google, Facebook, and other companies to emerge without Microsoft crushing them. The browser war ended Netscape but may have enabled the next generation of tech giants. Jobs versus Scully. Not all feuds are between companies. Some are within them. John Scully was brought in to run Apple in 1983. Steve Jobs, Apple's co-founder, recruited him away from Pepsi with the famous line, quote, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" unquote. 2 years later, Jobs and Scully were at war over the direction of the company. The Macintosh wasn't selling well. The board had to choose between them. They chose Scully. Jobs was stripped of his responsibilities and eventually left Apple. Jobs spent the next decade at Next and Pixar. Scully oversaw Apple's decline through the early 90s. By 1993, Scully was out. When Jobs returned in 1997, he systematically dismantled everything Scully had built. The Newton, Scully's personal project, was one of the first things canceled. Scully later said he regretted how things happened with Jobs. The man he recruited to change the world ended up being pushed out, only to return and save the company after Scully's vision had failed. And those are the feuds, personal rivalries between founders, corporate battles that lasted decades, format wars that reshaped industries, bitter disputes that ended in lawsuits and settlements. Tech is competitive because the stakes are high. Market dominance can mean billions. Losing can mean obsolescence. The feuds reflect how much is on the line. We're almost done. One section left. The pivotal moments. Single events that changed everything. But Section 6, Pivotal Moments. Oh. History is full of moments where everything could have gone differently. A single decision, a single meeting, a single announcement that changed the trajectory of an entire industry. These are the inflection points, the moments where we can draw a clear line between before and after. IBM chooses Intel. In 1980 and 81, IBM was building their personal computer. They needed a processor. The two main options were Intel's 8088 and Motorola's 68000. The Motorola chip was technically superior, better architecture, more elegant design. Most engineers would have chosen it. IBM chose Intel, primarily for cost reasons and supply chain considerations. That single decision created the x86 architecture that still powers almost every personal computer today. For over 40 years, the Intel instruction set has dominated desktop computing because IBM made a cost-driven decision in 1980. As one IBM veteran later joked, quote, "If IBM had chosen the Motorola 68000, we would have had the Winola duopoly rather than the Wintel duopoly," unquote. Steve Jobs visits Xerox PARC. In December 1979, Apple negotiated access to Xerox PARC, Xerox's research facility in Palo Alto. In exchange for 100,000 shares of pre-IPO Apple stock, Xerox would give Apple a demonstration of their work. Jobs walked into PARC and saw the Alto computer, graphical user interface, mouse, Windows, everything that would define personal computing for the next 40 years. By all accounts, Jobs went crazy. He was, quote, pacing around the room, shouting, "Why aren't you doing anything with this?" Unquote. He saw the future immediately. What Apple paid was about $1 million in stock. Xerox sold the stock almost immediately for about $200,000 in profit. Had Xerox held that Apple stock until today, it would be worth tens of billions of dollars. More importantly, Xerox had the graphical user interface, the mouse, the Windows, all of it. They had invented the future and didn't know what to do with it. Apple took the ideas and built Macintosh. Microsoft saw Macintosh and built Windows. Xerox invented the modern computer interface and let it walk out the door for $1 million. The Netscape IPO. On August 9, 1995, Netscape went public. The company was 16 months old. It had never made a profit. The stock was priced at $28. The stock opened at $71. It closed at $58.25. The company was valued at approximately $3 billion. A 16-month-old unprofitable company was worth $3 billion. August 9, 1995, was also the day Jerry Garcia died. There was a Wall Street joke at the time. Quote, "What were Jerry Garcia's last words? Netscape opened at what?" Unquote. The Netscape IPO is generally considered the starting gun of the dot-com era. It proved that internet companies could go public at astronomical valuations regardless of profitability. The boom that followed and the bust that came after traces back to that day. The iPhone announcement. On January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs took the stage at Macworld. His setup was masterful. Quote, "Today we're introducing 3 revolutionary products. First, a widescreen iPod with touch controls. Second, a revolutionary mobile phone. And third, a breakthrough internet communications device." Unquote. He repeated these 3 descriptions until the audience started to realize, quote, "These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone," unquote. The crowd went wild. What most people don't know is how fragile that demonstration was. The prototype iPhone kept crashing. Apple engineers had figured out a specific sequence of actions, a golden path, that minimized crashes. Jobs had to follow the script exactly. At one point, Jobs made a prank call on stage. He called a Starbucks and ordered 4,000 lattes to go. The audience laughed. Jobs knew exactly what he was doing. Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's CEO, mocked the announcement afterward. Quote, $500, fully subsidized. That is the most expensive phone in the world, unquote. He laughed at the idea that businesses would want it. The iPhone went on to transform mobile computing, spawn an entire app economy, and generate over $2 trillion in revenue. Ballmer's mockery became one of the most poorly aged predictions in tech history. The Bitcoin Whitepaper. On October 31st, 2008, an email arrived at a cryptography mailing list. The sender was Satoshi Nakamoto. The attachment was a 9-page white paper describing a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. October 31st was also just 2 weeks after officials announced the $2 trillion bank bailout in response to the financial crisis. The timing was not coincidental. The Genesis block of Bitcoin, mined on January 3, 2009, contained an embedded message referencing a headline about bank bailouts. Whatever else Bitcoin became, it started as a response to the financial crisis. Nakamoto participated in Bitcoin development and forums until April 2011, then disappeared. Their estimated holdings of over 1 million Bitcoin have never moved. Whether you think Bitcoin is revolutionary technology or speculative excess, its creation at that moment, by someone who then vanished, is one of the stranger stories in tech history. The Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. In March 2018, Christopher Wylie went public with documents showing that Cambridge Analytica had harvested data from 87 million Facebook users for political targeting. Wylie had been a director of research at the company. He knew exactly what they'd done. He described the operation as a, quote, psychological warfare mind-if-a-seek tool, unquote. Within days, over $100 billion was knocked off Facebook's market cap. Mark Zuckerberg was called to testify before Congress. GDPR went into effect weeks later. The regulatory landscape for data privacy shifted permanently. One whistleblower with documentary evidence changed how the world thought about social media data. The AWS launch Amazon Web Services launched in stages through 2006, S3 for storage in March, EC2 for computing in August. Amazon had apparently, quote, accidentally invented cloud computing, unquote. They'd built internal infrastructure tools to manage their own systems, then realized these tools could be products. AWS created what they called, quote, the illusion of infinite capacity, unquote. Instead of buying servers, companies could rent computing power that scaled automatically. The implications were enormous. Startups that would have needed millions in infrastructure investment could launch for thousands. Airbnb, Netflix, Dropbox, Pinterest. The entire startup explosion from 2007 to 2020 was enabled by cloud computing. AWS became more profitable than Amazon's retail business. The Everything Store's most valuable product turned out to be invisible infrastructure. ChatGPT launch. On November 30th, 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT with minimal fanfare. It was positioned as a research preview. It became the fastest-growing consumer application in history. 1 million users in 5 days. 100 million monthly active users in approximately 2 months. For comparison, it took TikTok 9 months and Instagram 2.5 years to reach that scale. Google reportedly declared a code red internally. Microsoft poured billions more into OpenAI. Every major tech company scrambled to respond. The current AI boom, estimated to have added trillions to tech market caps, traces directly to that moment. A research preview released the day before December. Tim Berners-Lee's decision. In August 1991, Tim Berners-Lee published the first web page. He had created HTML, HTTP, URLs, the first browser, and the first web server. He could have patented it. He could have licensed it. He could have tried to control the most important communication technology since the printing press. He gave it away. Berners-Lee later said, quote, had the technology been proprietary, and in my total control, it would probably not have taken off, unquote. He understood that openness was essential to adoption. At the 2012 London Olympics opening ceremony, Berners-Lee appeared and tweeted from the stadium. 3 words, quote, this is for everyone, unquote. The decision not to patent the web might be the most consequential act of generosity in tech history. The App Store launch. The iPhone launched in 2007 without an app store. Steve Jobs initially didn't want third-party apps. Quote, you don't want your phone to be like a PC, unquote, he said. His alternative was web apps. Developers could build websites that worked on the iPhone. The developer reaction was described as a, quote, golf clap, unquote. Polite, unenthusiastic. Phil Schiller and others lobbied Jobs to change his mind. Eventually, Jobs reportedly said, quote, "Oh hell, just go for it and leave me alone," unquote. The App Store launched on July 10, 2008. Within a year, it had over 50,000 apps. The ecosystem it created fundamentally changed how software was distributed. Total developer payouts from the App Store, as of 2023, exceeded $320 billion. All because Jobs eventually agreed to something he initially opposed. Closing. And that's where we'll end it. 3+ hours of weird tech lore. Regulations born from disasters. Company archetypes that keep repeating. 8 levels of the tech iceberg, from surface knowledge down to unsolved mysteries. Product failures that cost billions. Feuds that shaped industries. Pivotal moments that changed everything. If you made it through the whole thing, you now know more about this industry's strange history than most people who work in it. You know about the Phoebus cartel deliberately making light bulbs worse. You know about the company the CIA secretly owned for 50 years. You know about Yahoo turning down Google and Facebook and Microsoft and somehow ending up worth less than any of their asking prices. The tech industry presents itself as forward-looking, always about the next thing. But there's a lot to learn from what already happened. The patterns repeat, the same mistakes get made, the same types of companies keep appearing. Maybe knowing this history helps recognize patterns before they play out again. Or maybe it's just interesting stories. Either way, thanks for sticking around. This was a long one. If you want more content like this, subscribe and we'll keep making them. The algorithm apparently likes it when you click buttons, so if you enjoyed this, doing that helps. Otherwise, I hope this was good background noise for whatever you were doing. Falling asleep, working, driving, just existing while strange tech history played in the background. Take care.